Let's get another reaction. Following the BRICS Summit this week, the Secretary General of the South African Communist Party has slammed the government. He says South Africa is good at hosting summits, but is clearly unable to resolve the scourge of crime and unemployment. We're joined by the SACP's General Secretary, Solly Mapaila. Mr. Mapaila, thank you for being with us. You say that South Africa is becoming a stateless capitalist society. What does that mean?
Firstly, thank you very much for inviting us. What we are basically saying is that we have a state that is not able to effectively use its political power. And we want to encourage the government to appreciate that it has been elected by the majority of the people to lead this country, not by some unelected corporate officials who are trying to dominate policy space and interventions which have not been useful to the well-being of the people as a whole. Hence the crisis we face in our communities of crime, several other crises, whether it's an energy crisis, unemployment crisis, levels of no water in various communities. All of these problems could be resolved by an effective state. And therefore, the remodeling of a state to respond to social or disasters facing its nation are primary questions. And we're saying, if you look at the swiftness, the effortlessness of putting together such an infrastructure for BRICS countries, the 15th Summit, which we fully embrace, and we have been some of them articulates about the necessity for BRICS and for its expansion and why it provides a possible new international order that is against the imperialist countries that have dominated world discourse over the years. So we're not taking away that point. We're simply saying the efforts that have been used to convene such an important event in our country with almost 50 different countries and heads of states in our country, it's so critical that we could use that capacity to tackle one social challenge, for instance, whether it's crime, whether it's unemployment, lack of water in our communities, in the same way that we have done where we have inter-ministerial involvement across sectors to deal with a social problem. But like in this case, almost every minister in our cabinet have had their meetings with their counterparts in BRICS, several meetings, summits, and engagement and so forth. Why can't we have similar kind of interventions to attack crime in our community, to attack unemployment, to attack lack of water across the board?
Yeah.
These are social needs of South Africans. So that's the point in which this statement was raised.
Well, let's make it practical because one of the issues that government has claimed to be attacking is the power crisis. I mean, remember, we had a state of disaster declared to allow for red tape to be dealt with, etc. So are you saying that the focus has not been enough? Otherwise, surely that is one problem at least that would be fixed by now.
As you know, we called for state of disaster sometime long time ago, almost 2 years ago. We repeated that last year before it was pronounced for 3 months. And when it was pronounced, there were no effective measures for its pronunciation. In fact, we even appointed a minister of electricity without powers. Quite late, the minister was given his powers. So, and at that time, this matter, the government was already taken to court by other interest groups, and it felt that there was no need to contest this matter and reverse state of disaster intervention in energy. We still believe that energy remains a disaster area in our country at the moment, as well as water and sanitation. But the bottom line is that when you invoke disaster measures, you must have a plan. It must not be just disaster measures so that you are in control, but you do nothing. The same situation remains. And you know, the court case that the state did not contest actually highlighted the fact that you do have existing political instruments within the measures of disaster that we have promulgated, and therefore it was not necessary. Of course, we still believe that in the context of how it was contested in court with different interests by corporates who were feeling that the state may possibly impose its energy mix policy, for instance, highlight key security, energy security on the basis of coal, and they were already having an alternative. That was the political mission behind the court case against the disaster method. Ours was to resolve the crisis facing our people as a whole, and we still believe that that agency is required. And we're happy with the current minister, Dr. Ramokgopa Sputla, in his attitudes and postulations and his interventions. We think we're getting there to turn the corner around this crisis of energy.
All right, hopefully. So you're different to other commentators, correct me if I'm wrong, who say that South Africa is a failed state, which would mean government has lost control over the security situation and the behavior of citizens. Are you saying that this government is really just struggling to get things right?
No, not entirely. The government can do better. We share a component of what those people are saying. Of course, the problem is that the government has taken its policy space and given it to capital. And capital has, at the moment, my personal assessment, we still have to take this deeper, even within our structures, is that capital feels that the ANC has reached its sell-by date. It used the ANC to continue profitability in the country. Now it cannot continue with profitability with the ANC in charge, because the ANC cannot continue to rule without tempering the profitability of capital because of social pressures from the masses with regard to the degeneration of various services in our communities, which as government have to account for. Capital that promised to support the ANC in government in this regard has abdicated its own responsibilities, and it has had a state that it was able to put on its lap without the state imposing major policy measures that can compel capital to invest in this country. It has taken money out of the country. It has ordered money at the stock exchange without investing this money in productive economy, including in the sectors of social needs of our people, because they've been having a government allowing them to do as they please. So to that extent, there's not a failed state. Is it the ability to tweak or to change policies and I take control, particularly of macroeconomic framework, in order to control investments properly from the public and rebuild the public economy.
My final question then, how would government control capital? I mean, some would say, why, when companies are your best source of job creation, big companies are, despite all the hopes and dreams around small companies. Company leaders have pledged their support of late. Do you think that's cynical and not sincere? And what should government do? Because there's already been capital flight. Do you want it to say to global companies, you can't take any more money out? I mean, imagine the global backlash to that. I'm just trying to understand exactly what government should do.
There are many measures that what government could do. This is very same, particularly the global corporates. They do what they are not able to do in their countries of domicile, their original countries, for instance. But they are able to get away with murder in this country because the state has allowed particularly big corporates to dominate the policy space. We've bended backwards to accommodate them, and they've not been accommodative. And they've always threatened us with shifting investment from one country to the other. And they've even taken more investment to war-torn countries than to a more peaceful country like South Africa, and therefore denied us the ability to meet the promise of liberation, proper services to our communities, and so forth. But at the same time, we need a state that is understood to be a ruling state, not a state that is controlled by corporates who decide and define policy. And if the state is not implementing that policy properly, they throw toys around and do all wrong things, shift investment, threaten government, this and that. In other countries, it doesn't exist in that regard. That is why sometimes one of the concepts that business likes is this thing of so-called policy certainty. Yeah. In this country, we've had enough policy certainty But businesses played with it because they felt they could bend the government all the time backwards. And that's what needs to be corrected so that we can have a firm state in charge, not a stateless, a capitalist stateless society wherein capital can do as it pleases. It can go into any other sector. Whether it is Amazamas, you'll find the role of capital in that space as well.
Yeah. All right. We've run out of time, but I hope we can take this further, perhaps in a debate in future. That was General Secretary of the SA Communist Party, Solly Mapaila.